I heard her say it. He won't understand anyway. When I look back, that was the moment everything quietly shifted inside me. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is. I had arrived early at Daniel and Emma's apartment that afternoon. The hallway outside their door smelled faintly of detergent and the citrus cleaner. The building used a smell I'd come to associate with quick visits and polite conversations. I knocked once, gently, more out of habit than necessity. No one answered. I figured they were still getting ready, so I tried the handle, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The door opened halfway and I stepped into their living room. That's when I heard her voice clear, sharp, almost irritated. He won't understand anyway. Just leave it. Her words weren't cruel in volume, but they were cruel in meaning, and the worst part was the assumption, as if I had no grasp of anything happening around me. I froze in place, not because the sentence hurt, but because of the tone underneath it. Not annoyance. Not impatience. Something closer to calculation. Emma's voice had that smooth, composed edge she used when she wanted someone to follow her lead. I didn't move immediately. I stood behind the half-closed door to the hallway, unsure whether to make a sound, unsure whether I even wanted her to know I'd heard. There was a brief shuffling sound, papers maybe, and then silence. It seemed safer to pretend I hadn't walked in yet. It's just me. Emma came around the corner wearing a smile too neat, too placed. Michael, you're early, she said, brushing imaginary dust from the counter. Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, who lingered behind her, shoulders tense. Their apartment looked unusually arranged. Not messy, just staged. The throw pillows were stacked instead of scattered, and the coffee table had an open envelope lying on it. But Emma tried to slide her hand over it casually, as if to hide it. I pretended not to notice. It's strange how habit can make you behave gently even toward people who don't quite treat you the same. I sat on the couch. Daniel avoided eye contact, and Emma kept smoothing her hair behind her ear, her tell whenever she was anxious. The air conditioner hummed quietly, the only steady thing in the room. Then my eyes drifted back to that envelope she tried to hide. The flap was torn open. The print on the corner read, Northland Insurance Group, and the name on it. Saw it before she slid a magazine over. It wasn't hers. It was Daniel's. I didn't say a word. But something in my chest tightened, the way it does when your instincts start whispering that something isn't what it looks like. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself she probably opened it by accident. I told myself a lie because it was easier. A few minutes later, she went to fetch coffee. While she clattered mugs in the kitchen, that envelope peeked out again from beneath the magazine, almost as if asking to be noticed. The address label was printed in bold, and the seal looked like it had been opened in a hurry. That was my. I didn't touch it. I only memorized the return address and the policy reference number printed near the barcode. Years of working with logistics taught me one thing. Small numbers tell big stories later. I ran the sequence through my mind until it stuck. When Emma returned, she placed cups on the table, but not like someone offering coffee, more like someone performing hospitality. Daniel finally sat across from me, shoulders hunched. He asked about my week with a voice that sounded borrowed, as if he didn't have enough of his own left to speak normally. Conversation felt hollow. She spoke in clipped lines, he spoke in half sentences, and I spoke just enough to keep the peace. I couldn't shake the feeling that the sentence I'd overheard wasn't about intelligence or understanding. It felt like reassurance, something spoken to keep someone calm. Don't worry, he won't understand anyway. Reassurance to who? And about what? When it was time to leave, Emma handed me leftovers she'd packed earlier, even though I hadn't eaten a thing there. It felt like a gesture meant to distract. As I stepped into the hallway, the cool air brushed against my face. Everything seemed too quiet, too arranged, too false. Walking toward the elevator, I replayed her tone in my head. Not dismissive, strategic, and Daniel's eyes. They looked like eyes holding something back. Something heavy. I didn't know what the envelope contained. Didn't know why she opened it. Didn't know why she said that sentence. But I knew one thing as the elevator doors closed. Small things don't stay small for long, and this was only the first one. I've eaten dinner with my son and his wife more times than I can count, but that night, It felt like I'd stepped into a place where everyone already knew a script except me. When I look back, that was the first evening I realized something was shifting beneath the surface. The restaurant wasn't fancy, just a quiet place tucked near their apartment, known for soft lighting and a steady hum of conversation. The kind of place where the clinking of glasses blends with low music, and nothing ever feels urgent. I arrived a few minutes early and waited inside the entrance, letting the warmth from the overhead lamps settle on my shoulders. It was a comforting kind of dimness, the kind that usually softens awkwardness. Not that night Daniel and Emma walked in together, but they didn't feel together. Daniel's eyes met mine with a tentative smile, the kind a son gives when he's tired and trying not to show it. Emma, on the other hand, offered a quick half-hug and immediately straightened her blazer. It's like she was preparing for a presentation. I should have known right then. We sat at a small round table by the window. Outside, the street lamps reflected on the wet pavement, making everything look like it was painted twice, a reflection beneath a reflection. Inside, the air smelled faintly of rosemary and lemon butter, usually peaceful scents. But my stomach didn't settle. Emma opened the menu first. "Let's try something new today," she said, though her tone felt more like instruction than invitation. He wasn't making decisions, he was avoiding them. The waiter arrived with a tight smile. We ordered. Small talk began. But small talk wasn't the right phrase. It felt more like a negotiation with emotions none of us wanted to express. Emma asked about my week, but her eyes kept drifting toward her phone screen. Daniel asked if I'd checked my car's servicing schedule, but his voice was hollow, as if repeating something he'd been told to ask. Every topic felt rehearsed, almost mechanical. Then midway through dinner, something shifted. The waiter placed the plates down gently, and as he walked away, Emma leaned toward Daniel and whispered something under her breath. Not loud enough to hear, but loud enough to see his face change. His hand froze around his fork. A shadow crossed his expression, fear, maybe, or guilt. Hard to tell. I didn't want to pry, but silence can be more revealing than questions. So I simply watched. After dessert, Emma excused herself to take a quick call. She walked out with her phone already pressed to her ear, except the screen was still locked when she turned away. That detail stayed with me. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Daniel and I were alone for the first time that evening. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Long week," he murmured. "Everything all right?" I asked. His answer was delayed. Too delayed, yeah. Just work. Not a lie, but not the truth either. Before I could ask more, Emma returned with a bright smile glued to her face. "All handled," she said, with a kind of victory in her eyes. We got up to leave. I offered to pay as I usually did, but Emma insisted she'd already taken care of it. "You're our guest," she said, placing a hand on my arm a beat too long to feel natural. But what she didn't realize was that the restaurant emails the receipt to the primary reservation holder, and later that night, when I opened my phone, there it was, the paper action of this chapter. The receipt showed something strange. Private room extension, 40 minutes. They hadn't mentioned any private room tonight, and he sat in the main area the entire time. There was no additional room, no extra table, nothing needing extension. So why had they been billed for it a week earlier? I stared at the timestamp. Same evening they told me they were at home resting. Same evening Daniel claimed he'd worked late. Same evening Emma said she'd been too tired to cook. It wasn't the extra fee that concerned me. It was the question behind it. Who were they meeting in that private room? And why cover it up with such casual lies? When I closed the email, the glow of the screen lingered on my hands like a quiet warning. Something about their smiles, their conversation, the whispers at the table. It all added up to a picture I didn't want to see yet. But avoidance doesn't change truth. It just delays it. On the drive home with the sound of tires smoothing over wet pavement, I realized this wasn't just an awkward dinner. It was the beginning of a thread that, once pulled, would unravel everything. I've received real apologies in my life. Quiet, sincere ones that come with a shift in someone's eyes. But the one Emma gave me that afternoon, it felt polished, rehearsed, almost manufactured. When I think back, that was the moment I realized She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was trying to manage me. 2 days after the dinner, Emma asked me to stop by their apartment. She sounded cheerful on the phone, overly so, like someone auditioning for a role. I told myself not to overthink, but the tension from that dinner hadn't left me. Still, I went because when your son's marriage feels like it's bending, you show up with a calm face and open hands. The afternoon light filtered through their living room curtains when I arrived.
Oh.
Dust particles floated in the beam like soft static. Emma stood in the center of the room with her arms folded behind her back, a smile pressed into place. "Michael," she began, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry if I came across wrong the other day." Her voice was smooth, almost soothing. "Too soothing? For what exactly?" I asked softly. She blinked once, twice, the way people do when they weren't expecting to be asked to define their apology, you know. My tone, I was stressed. It wasn't personal. I nodded, but the air around the words felt hollow. Stress makes people short-tempered. Yes, but stress doesn't make someone say, "He won't understand anyway." That line had intention behind it, not frustration, strategy. Daniel wandered into the living room a moment later. He looked like someone running on worn-out sleep and heavy thoughts. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed. He gave me a small smile, but it faded when Emma glanced at him, "Right?" she asked him. "It was just a misunderstanding." Daniel swallowed before answering. "Yeah, she didn't mean anything." His voice cracked around the edges. That's when I knew this apology wasn't about mending. It was about alignment, making sure he stayed on her script. We moved to the hallway, and that's when something caught my eye again. The picture frames. Last time I'd noticed a photo with a man I didn't recognize. Casual snapshot, Emma standing beside him at what looked like an office event. I had assumed he was a friend or former co-worker. But now the photo frame sat slightly angled forward, as if someone had recently handled it. I walked closer. Emma's voice trailed behind me, still talking about miscommunication and silly worries. But her words blurred into background noise. My focus was on that photo. The man had one hand resting on Emma's back, comfortably, too comfortably for a coworker. And the way Emma smiled in that picture, it didn't match the smile she wore around Daniel. I didn't touch the photo frame. I simply looked at it long enough to remember the man's face, the shape of his jaw, the mole under his left eye, the way his tie sat crooked like he'd loosened it during the event. That image stayed with me. A minute later, Emma moved in beside me. Her smile tightened. "Oh, that old picture," she said quickly. "That's just someone I used to work with. Doesn't mean anything." She said it too fast. It's the kind of speed people use when covering a crack before anyone notices. I let her talk. Sometimes silence reveals more than confrontation. And in that silence, she kept explaining, over-explaining. A true apology doesn't need justification, and a harmless picture doesn't need defending. Then came the of this chapter, on the hallway. Table, half hidden under a small bowl of keys, was a delivery slip addressed to Emma. The sender's name? V. Hale. The same initials I'd seen under the photo frame, a small plaque reading team lead, Vincent Hale, a colleague, she'd said. But colleagues don't send personal deliveries to married women on weekdays when their husbands are at work. I didn't pick up the slip. Just read it. Every number, every letter, every date. It settled into my memory like a stone sinking into water. You don't need to collect every paper physically. Sometimes remembering them is enough. Emma quickly moved the slip when she noticed my eyes on it. Another gesture too swift to be casual. Daniel tried to lighten the mood, asking if I wanted coffee. I agreed, mostly to observe. Watching him move around the kitchen, I saw something I hadn't seen before: hesitation. Every motion seemed timed to her reactions. Every sentence seemed filtered through her expression. When I left their apartment, the apology still echoed in my mind. Not because it healed anything it didn't, but because it told me something important. She wasn't afraid of having hurt me. She was afraid of what I might have heard as I stepped outside into the cool air. I realized her apology wasn't meant to comfort. It was meant to redirect. keep attention away from the things she didn't want noticed. But the problem with trying to manage people is that sometimes you underestimate the wrong person. I didn't plan on going to the doctor that morning. It was supposed to be a quick errand day, nothing more. But sometimes life nudges you into places where truth waits, quietly behind ordinary doors. The clinic was one of those modern places with pale walls and soft beeping sounds echoing from distant rooms. A line of chairs stretched across the waiting area, each occupied by someone wearing the same mildly anxious expression people wear when they're trying to ignore their own thoughts. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin lines, cutting the room into warm stripes and cool shadows. I checked in, sat down, and let the quietness settle over me. My chest had felt tight for 2 days. Not painful, just heavy. Stress can hide itself well, but the body always whispers before it shouts. While waiting, I couldn't help replaying the last 3 interactions with Daniel and Emma, the sentence behind the door, the dinner bill with the private room, the apology that wasn't an apology. Each one a piece of a pattern I was starting to recognize but didn't yet understand. "Michael Reed," a nurse called. I followed her inside. The exam room was cool, almost cold, as if the air conditioning was running harder than necessary. The fluorescent lights above hummed quietly. I sat on the exam table while she strapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. Tightened, released, and tightened again. She frowned softly. "Has your blood pressure been high before?" "It's not usually," I said. She typed something into her tablet. "You might be under some stress?" I almost laughed. Not a real laugh. More like a breath that understood too much. "Yes," I said gently. "A little." A few minutes later, Dr. Lewis walked in. Was calm with a voice that made people feel safe, even when they weren't. He looked at the vitals on the monitor and raised an eyebrow. "Elevated," he said. "Not dangerous, but unusual for you." "I've had a lot on my mind," I admitted. He sat down. "Want to talk about anything?" I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because I wasn't sure where to begin. "How do you explain that your heart feels heavier because of things no one is saying out loud?" "I'm just noticing things," I said finally. "Small things, but they don't feel small anymore." He nodded the way someone does when they've seen this pattern before. Stress creeping in quietly, disguised as observation, disguised as responsibility. "Pay attention to it," he said. "Your instincts, I mean." I appreciated that more than he knew. We talked for a few more minutes about practical things: sleep, diet, routine. He printed the summary of the visit, folded it once, and handed it to me. That was my visit summary. Elevated blood pressure, stress indicators. A small paper, but a quiet confirmation that something inside me had shifted as I left the room. Walking through the hallway toward the exit, I paused near the vending machines. Someone was speaking in a lowered voice around the corner. A woman, familiar tone. Controlled, brisk, slightly irritated. When I stepped closer, I saw her profile reflected in the metal of the vending machine. Emma. She wasn't supposed to be there. She hadn't mentioned any appointments. She wasn't wearing workout clothes or grocery bags or anything that suggested errands. Just her usual crisp attire and her phone pressed to her ear, and then I saw the name glowing on her phone screen just before she turned it away. V. Hill, incoming call. The same name from the photo frame. The same name from the delivery slip. Her voice dropped even lower. "No, not here. I told you. I'll talk later. Don't call again until I say so." She ended the call quickly. For a moment, she looked around, scanning the hallway. I turned away before she could see me. My heart beat faster, and not because of the clinic's machines or fluorescent lights. Stress wasn't hiding anymore. It was standing directly in front of me, wearing a familiar face and speaking in careful whispers. When she finally walked past me, she offered a startled smile. "Oh, Michael, what are you doing here?" "Routine checkup," I replied calmly. "You?" "Oh, just sorting out something with insurance," she said too quickly, adjusting her purse strap. Nothing important. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Insurance, just like the envelope she'd opened, just like the documents she didn't want anyone to see. She left hurriedly. heels clicking sharply against the tiles. I stood there for another minute, letting the pieces settle in my mind. The picture, the delivery slip, the private room, the phone call, and now this. Small things don't stay small. They stack themselves quietly until the weight becomes undeniable. On my way out, I placed the folded visit summary into my wallet, not as medical proof, but as a reminder. Stress isn't the problem. The truth you're avoiding is. I didn't intend to drive anywhere that night. I only meant to step outside for fresh air. But once I sat in the car, the silence inside felt safer than the silence in my own living room. The night was cool, the kind that settles gently over the streets and makes everything look softer than it actually is. Street lights reflected on the asphalt like thin strokes of gold paint. I turned the engine on without thinking, let the headlights cut a narrow path through the quiet neighborhood, and drove without direction. Sometimes movement feels like clarity, even when you don't know where you're going. My mind kept circling the same thoughts. The clinic hallway, the way Emma's voice dropped when she spoke to him, the way she flinched when she saw me, and Daniel. Something was wrong there too, something deeper than a strained marriage or a stressful week. I drove past closed stores, gas stations with only one pump lit, diners with a handful of late-shift workers sipping coffee under heavy eyes. Everything felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath. Maybe I was too. Eventually, I pulled into a small 24-hour diner on the edge of town. It wasn't special, red neon sign buzzing faintly. A few trucks parked outside, chairs stacked in corners, but it had warm light and quiet corners. I needed both. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and grilled toast. A waitress nodded at me, recognized me from past visits, and pointed toward a booth near the window. I sat down, my thoughts still tangled. Then, as the waitress poured coffee, something outside caught my attention. Daniel's car, parked 2 rows away. The same dent near the bumper. The same sun-faded parking sticker. For a moment, I told myself it couldn't be his. It was too late, too far from his side of town, too strange. But then he stepped out from the driver's side, wiping his face with his sleeve. He looked tired. Not normal tired. The kind of tired someone gets after holding something. Heavy inside their chest for too long, he entered the diner without seeing me, heading straight to a corner booth. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes rimmed in redness, his hands trembling slightly as he removed his jacket. He didn't look like a man meeting someone. He looked like a man trying not to fall apart. I didn't approach him. Some moments aren't meant to be interrupted. I watched quietly as he ordered something and rested his forehead against his hand. Every few minutes he checked his phone. But not like someone expecting a message, more like someone afraid one might arrive. 10 minutes passed before he noticed me. His eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his face. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Late coffee," I said gently. He hesitated. A long, trembling hesitation. Just needed air. I nodded. "Rough day?" He swallowed, staring into his cup. "Yeah, rough." I didn't press. He wasn't ready. And I wasn't there to corner him, just to be present. We talked lightly about work, about the weather, about nothing that mattered. His hands kept fidgeting with the napkin, tearing small pieces without noticing. After a few minutes, he stood up. "I should head home. Emma's waiting." Something in his voice made the word home sound like a burden. He paid his bill at the counter while I stayed seated. And that's when the waitress came back with the of this chapter, the small slip she'd printed earlier. "Sir? You forgot this," she said, handing me a copy of Daniel's receipt by mistake. I didn't plan to look at it, but my eyes landed on the Tim's 11 for 2 p.m. 30 minutes earlier. Daniel had texted me saying he had just arrived home. No mention of being out. No mention of the diner, and under the line items coffee, fries, there was a note from the server. "Same booth as last week. Last week, the same evening, Emma and Daniel claimed they were home watching a movie. Same evening, the private room extension charge appeared. On their dinner bill, the same evening, everything had felt off." I folded the receipt quietly. Slipped it into my wallet, not as accusation, just as another thread in the pattern forming around them as Daniel walked out. I followed a moment later, watching his silhouette under the neon lights. He stood by his car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel before finally getting in, a man debating whether he wanted to go home or not. Driving back, the city lights dimmed into the edges of the night. My car hummed steadily, but my thoughts weren't steady at all. Something was pulling at the corners of Daniel's life, something heavy, something hidden, something he wasn't ready to speak about, and I had a feeling the truth would hurt before it healed. I didn't go there to look for anything. I went to help. Just help, but sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It flashes across a screen before someone can hide it. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. Daniel had asked if I could stop by and help move some groceries from their car. Nothing dramatic, just an ordinary errand on an ordinary day. I almost appreciated the normalcy after the strange tension of the past week. The sun was soft. The kind that makes everything look cleaner than it really is. Birds were loud, the sky clear, the air mild. I told myself it was a good sign, a good day, but good days have a way of turning sharply when you least expect it. I reached their apartment just as they returned from the store. Bags filled the back seat, and Daniel waved at me with a tired smile. Emma barely glanced my way, already on her phone, thumb moving rapidly like she was trying to erase something before it existed. We carried the bags upstairs. Daniel took the heavier ones. I took the rest. Emma walked ahead, unlocking the door while still typing. Her phone buzzed once, twice, and she muttered something under her breath. Inside the kitchen, Daniel started unloading vegetables. Emma placed her phone on the counter beside the sink and began pulling items from a bag with one hand while texting with the other. I stepped in beside her, unpacking cereal boxes and canned goods. That's when the screen lit up. Not intentionally. Not deliberately. Just the way phones do when a new notification arrives. The screen faced me directly. Transfer completed Friday. 6 p.m. confirmation, ID, number 98,417. For a second, my mind didn't connect it to anything. Then it did. Transfer, the same word from the clinic. Hallway, when her caller said completed. The same time window as Daniel's late-night diner visit, the same week as the private room extension. Emma lunged for the phone. Not casually, not accidentally, not naturally. She grabbed it with a sharp, almost panicked motion, locking the screen before it fully loaded. Her eyes flicked to me, measuring my expression. Just work stuff, she said, stuffing it into her purse. Work stuff doesn't usually require urgency like that. Daniel looked up from the fridge, confused. Everything okay? Yes, she replied quickly. Too quickly. Just a glitch. Phones don't glitch by sending transfer confirmations with exact timestamps. I continued unpacking, pretending I hadn't seen anything, but inside, something shifted. The kind of shift that happens when instinct stops whispering and starts speaking clearly to change the atmosphere. Daniel asked me about the groceries, whether frozen items. It should go in the small freezer or the chest freezer in the hallway closet. He wasn't asking about groceries. He was asking for an escape from whatever tension Emma had just created. I'll take the frozen stuff, I said gently, giving him space. While I carried the items down the hall, Emma stayed in the kitchen. I could hear her muttering, pacing lightly. A soft click told me she opened her purse again. Another click, the sound of locking her phone repeatedly, as if double-checking it was sealed. When I returned, she was suddenly cheerful. Bright. Overly bright. So, she said, clapping her hands together. Lunch. Her smile was too wide, stretched a little too tight. Daniel didn't smile at all. I noticed he rubbed his wrist. An old habit from childhood whenever he was anxious or unsure. He avoided looking at Emma. He avoided looking at me. He avoided looking anywhere the truth might be hiding. I stayed for lunch, mostly to observe. Daniel talked less than usual. Emma talked more than usual, filling silences with stories that didn't land, jokes that didn't fit, and reassurances no one had asked for. After we finished eating, I excused myself. Emma insisted I take a container of soup with me. Daniel walked me to the door. His voice dropped low. "Dad," he said quietly, making sure Emma couldn't hear. "Are you noticing things?" I didn't answer right away. His eyes were tired, red, fragile. "I'm here if you need me," I told him. He nodded, a small, grateful nod, and closed the door gently behind me. Outside, the hallway felt colder than it should have, like the building itself was holding its breath. When I reached my car, I opened my wallet and placed the folded diner receipt beside the clinic visit summary now. There was another piece to add, not physically, but mentally. Transfer completed Friday. 6 p.m. I didn't know the amount. I know who received it, but I knew what the message meant. Something was moving behind the scenes. Money, secrecy, timing, none of it accidental. As I started the engine, I realized that whatever they were hiding, it was starting to surface whether they wanted it to or not. People say big truths arrive with noise, confrontation, shouting, dramatic revelations. But in my life, the truths that mattered most came quietly, in the form of small paper slips, accidental coincidences, in moments where no one realized I was paying attention. By the time I reached home that evening, my head felt full, not of conclusions, but of fragments. The insurance envelope Emma had opened, the private room receipt from the restaurant, and now the transfer notification that lit up on her phone. 3 separate incidents. 3 small things, but small things say a lot when they start repeating the same patterns. Hidden hands, quiet movement, secrecy. I placed my keys on the kitchen table, sat down, and pulled out the papers I had. The diner slip, my doctor's visit summary, the printed restaurant bill they'd forwarded by mistake. I spread them across the table like puzzle pieces. Though I wasn't yet sure what picture they formed, the kitchen clock ticked steadily above me. Calm sound, a grounding one. I started with dates, the simplest place to start. The private room charge. Last Friday, 7:20 p.m., Daniel's alone time at the diner. Last Friday, 11:42 p.m., Emma's transfer confirmation. This Friday, 6 p.m., different events, different locations, but one detail stood out. The previous Friday kept showing up in every single piece. I leaned back, letting that settle. Patterns aren't always about what is present. Sometimes they're about what keeps showing up in the shadows. My phone buzzed. Grace, their neighbor. She was the kind of woman who noticed things without meaning to, simply because she cared too much about people. Her text was short. "Hey, did Daniel look okay to you lately?" I asked why. Her reply came almost instantly. "Saw Emma with someone again last Friday. Thought it was odd." Again, there it was. That same evening, that same thread, I called her. "Do you remember the time?" I asked gently. "Roughly 6:30, she said. "Maybe a bit after." They were coming down the stairs. I waved, but Emma didn't see me. The man was talking to her the whole time. 6-30 minutes. After the transfer temp. Minutes. Before the private room extension, not proof, but enough to make the picture sharper. After we hung up, I stared at the timeline forming on my table, 3 pieces pointing to the same quiet storm. Then something else occurred to me. When you look at events as individual moments, they feel harmless. But when you line them up, they stop being moments. They become meaning. With a slow breath, I opened my laptop. I wasn't searching for anything secret or invasive. I just typed a simple query: Northland Insurance Group, beneficiary policy dates. General page loaded. Nothing personal. Nothing private, but one line stood out. Beneficiary changes or inquiries processed on weekends often reflect on the following Friday. Back weekend, following Friday. Someone. Reading Daniel's mail? Someone. Making calls about insurance. Someone. Moving money at 6 p.m. and meeting someone at 6:30. Someone hosting a private meeting by 7:20. The pattern wasn't imaginary. Anymore, it was tightening. That's when I decided I needed more than scattered papers. I needed a clear outline, so I went to my printer. retrieved a blank sheet, and wrote a simple header. Events week 1 to week 2. That was the timeline sheet. One clean page, where things would no longer hide behind coincidence. I listed everything chronologically. The enveloped the private room, the diner booth, the clinic hallway. Call that the transfer message. Grace's sighting, every detail, every time, every quiet inconsistency. And there, near the middle of the page, 2 dates overlapped. A perfect alignment of the transfer and the meeting. 2 hours that explained everything without saying a word. When I finished, I looked at the page for a long time. Not because I wanted to judge it, but because sometimes clarity feels heavier than confusion. The truth wasn't visible yet, but the shape of it was forming, and I knew for the first time that something Daniel wasn't telling me wasn't just emotional. It was practical, strategic, planned. I folded the timeline and slid it into a folder with the other papers. The soft sound of the folder closing felt like a final decision. Something was happening, something coordinated, and someone, maybe both of them, were at the center of it. As I turned off the kitchen light, one thought stayed with me. Patterns don't lie, people do. Some truths don't arrive through conversations or confessions. Sometimes they appear in the form of a stranger, walking into a place he doesn't. Balana was late afternoon when Grace knocked on my door. She never knocked loudly, just 3 soft taps, like she didn't want to disturb the air. When I opened the door, she stood there holding a folded piece of paper and wearing a look that was equal parts concern and hesitation. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I nodded and stepped aside. She walked in with careful steps, the way people move when they aren't sure whether the thing they're about to say will help or harm. "I didn't want to make assumptions," she began, "but something happened yesterday, and I thought you should know." She sat at the table while I poured tea, but she didn't touch the cup. Her hands were clasped around the paper she'd brought. "I saw someone," she said finally. "Someone entering Daniel and Emma's apartment when they weren't home." The sentence hung in the air like a thin crack spreading across glass. I didn't react immediately. "Are you sure they weren't home?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle. "I'm sure," she said. "I was watering their plants. Emma gave me the spare key for emergencies. They weren't supposed to return until evening." I waited. That's when I saw him. A man, tall, dark gray jacket, black car. He walked right in like he belonged there. Something inside me tightened, the way instinct tightens when it recognizes the shape of danger before the mind fully catches up. "Did he knock?" I asked. "No," she said. "He used a key." A key only 3 people should have had keys. Daniel, Emma, Grace. But hers was a copy Emma told her to keep just in case. "Did he stay long?" I asked. 20 minutes, she said. "Maybe less." He seemed comfortable, familiar. That word familiar pressed harder on the edges of my mind than I expected. Grace unfolded the paper she'd been holding. I felt uneasy, so I wrote down his license plate. Just in case, she slid it across the table. 7 numbers, a plate I didn't recognize until. I did, because my mind had already memorized a face that went with it. That man. She continued carefully. "I think I saw him once before. At the building. Maybe a few weeks back." I unfolded the timeline I'd been building. Friday, 6 p.m. transfer. Friday, 6:30, Grace's sighting. Friday, 7:20, private room. Extension, an entire chain of events hinged on the presence of someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I placed the license plate note beside the timeline, and the alignment became clearer. "Grace," I asked softly, "did you see him clearly?" "Yes," she said. "And actually, I think he's the same man in that framed photo in their hallway." There it was, the confirmation. My instincts had been circling for days. The man from the picture, the one with his hand on Emma's back. The one, she said, didn't mean anything. Vincent Hale, a name tied to late-night calls, deliveries, insurance documents, and meetings she claimed were coincidences. Now he had access to their home. Grace looked at me with concern. "I don't want to interfere, But Daniel, he hasn't looked well. I figured you should know. I nodded slowly. Thank you. You did the right thing. She left soon after, her steps soft on the hallway carpet. Once the door closed, the apartment felt different. Not heavier, just clearer. Like someone had finally wiped the fog from a mirror. I sat at the table and stared at the license plate note. Paper can be thin, fragile, forgettable, yet sometimes it carries the weight of a truth no one wants to say out loud. That was my of the chapter. A handwritten note with 7 digits that confirmed a stranger was not a stranger at all. I leaned back, letting the pieces settle at Emma. Hadn't been careless. She'd been confident. And confidence only grows when someone believes the truth is safely hidden. When they believe no one is looking for patterns. But the problem with hiding things is simple. The world keeps leaving traces. Receipts, phone notifications, strangers with keys, neighbors. With good memories, as the daylight dimmed, I placed the note into my folder. The folder was starting to feel heavier, not physically but in meaning. This wasn't about random coincidences anymore. There was movement behind the scenes, and I had glimpsed the first clear silhouette. The man in the photo wasn't a forgotten colleague. He was the visitor who walked into my son's home like it belonged to him, and that meant one thing. Someone was building a life in the shadows, a life that wasn't supposed to exist. Some answers don't come from conversations. They come from moments when the world stops, paying attention, and something private lies open long enough for truth to breathe. 3 days after, Grace handed me the license plate note. I went to see Daniel again. Not to interrogate him, just to check on him, the way fathers do when their sons begin carrying weights they refuse to name. He had sounded tired on the phone, his voice strained and thin. When I arrived at his apartment, the door was half open, the exact way it had been weeks earlier when Emma said, "He won't understand anyway." I stepped inside quietly. Daniel was in the kitchen, rinsing a mug. The sound of running water filled the room, soft but steady. "Dad," he said, surprised. "I thought you'd text first." "I was nearby," I told him. "Wanted to say hello." He nodded, rubbing his forehead. Yeah, of course. Come in." The living room looked the same as always, neat, curated, every object placed intentionally. But something felt off. A small shift in energy. The kind of shift you feel when someone is trying to keep their life from tipping over the edge. "I'm making tea," he said. "Give me a minute." He walked back to the kitchen, leaving his phone lying face down on the desk by the wall. I took a seat on the chair nearby, not meaning to look at anything. Just sitting. Just breathing. But when he placed the kettle on the stovetop, a vibration echoed through the desk. His phone lit up. Not the lock screen, the actual home screen, unlocked. I placed my keys on the kitchen table, sat down, and pulled out the papers I had. The diner slip. My doctor's visit summary. The printed restaurant bill they'd forwarded by mistake. I spread them across the table like puzzle pieces. Though I wasn't yet sure what picture they formed, the kitchen clock ticked steadily above me. Calm sound, a grounding one. I started with dates, the simplest place to start. The private room charge. Last Friday, 7:20 p.m., Daniel's alone time at the diner. Last Friday, 11:42 p.m. Emma's transfer confirmation. This Friday, 6 p.m., different events. Different locations, but one detail stood out. The previous Friday kept showing up in every single piece. I leaned back, letting that settle. Patterns aren't always about what is present. Sometimes they're about what keeps showing up in the shadows. My phone buzzed. Grace, their neighbor. She was the kind of woman who noticed things without meaning to, simply because she cared too much about people. Her text was short. "Hey, did Daniel look okay to you lately?" I asked why. Her reply came almost instantly. "Saw Emma with someone again last Friday. Thought it was odd." Again, there it was. That same evening, that same thread, I called her. "Do you remember the time?" I asked gently. "Roughly 6:30, she said. "Maybe a bit after." They were coming down the stairs. I waved, but Emma didn't see me. The man was talking to her the whole time. 6-30 minutes. After the transfer temp. minutes. Before the private room extension, not proof, but enough to make the picture sharper. After we hung up, I stared at the timeline forming on my table, 3 pieces pointing to the same quiet storm. Then something else occurred to me. When you look at events as individual moments, they feel harmless. But when you line them up, they stop being moments. They become meaning. With a slow breath, I opened my laptop. I wasn't searching for anything secret or invasive. I just typed a simple query: Northland Insurance Group, beneficiary policy dates. General page loaded. Nothing personal. Nothing private, but one line stood out. Beneficiary changes or inquiries processed on weekends often reflect on the following Friday. Back weekend, following Friday. Someone. Reading Daniel's mail? Someone. Making calls about insurance. Someone. Moving money at 6 p.m. and meeting someone at 6:30. Someone hosting a private meeting by 7:20. The pattern wasn't imaginary. Anymore, it was tightening. That's when I decided I needed more than scattered papers. I needed a clear outline, so I went to my printer, retrieved a blank sheet, and wrote a simple header. Events week 1 to week 2. That was the timeline sheet. One clean page, where things would no longer hide behind coincidence. I listed everything chronologically. The enveloped the private room, the diner booth, the clinic hallway. Call that the transfer message. Grace's sighting, every detail, every time, every quiet inconsistency. And there, near the middle of the page, 2 dates overlapped. A perfect alignment of the transfer and the meeting. 2 hours that explained everything without saying a word. When I finished, I looked at the page for a long time. Not because I wanted to judge it, but because sometimes clarity feels heavier than confusion. The truth wasn't visible yet, but the shape of it was forming, and I knew for the first time that something Daniel wasn't telling me wasn't just emotional. It was practical, strategic, planned. I folded the timeline and slid it into a folder with the other papers. The soft sound of the folder closing felt like a final decision. Something was happening, something coordinated, and someone, maybe both of them, were at the center of it. As I turned off the kitchen light, one thought stayed with me. Patterns don't lie, people do. Some truths don't arrive through conversations or confessions. Sometimes they appear in the form of a stranger, walking into a place he doesn't. Balana was late afternoon when Grace knocked on my door. She never knocked loudly, just 3 soft taps, like she didn't want to disturb the air. When I opened the door, she stood there holding a folded piece of paper and wearing a look that was equal parts concern and hesitation. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I nodded and stepped aside. She walked in with careful steps, the way people move when they aren't sure whether the thing they're about to say will help or harm. "I didn't want to make assumptions," she began, "but something happened yesterday, and I thought you should know." She sat at the table while I poured tea, but she didn't touch the cup. Her hands were clasped around the paper she'd brought. "I saw someone," she said finally. "Someone entering Daniel and Emma's apartment when they weren't home." The sentence hung in the air like a thin crack spreading across glass. I didn't react immediately. "Are you sure they weren't home?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle. "I'm sure," she said. "I was watering their plants. Emma gave me the spare key for emergencies. They weren't supposed to return until evening." I waited. That's when I saw him. A man, tall, dark gray jacket, black car. He walked right in like he belonged there. Something inside me tightened, the way instinct tightens when it recognizes the shape of danger before the mind fully catches up. "Did he knock?" I asked. "No," she said. "He used a key." A key only 3 people should have had keys. Daniel, Emma, Grace. But hers was a copy Emma told her to keep just in case. "Did he stay long?" I asked. 20 minutes, she said. Maybe less. He seemed comfortable, familiar. That word familiar pressed harder on the edges of my mind than I expected. Grace unfolded the paper she'd been holding. I felt uneasy, so I wrote down his license plate. Just in case, she slid it across the table. 7 numbers, a plate I didn't recognize until. I did, because my mind had already memorized a face that went with it. That man. She continued carefully. I think I saw him once before. At the building. Maybe a few weeks back. I unfolded the timeline I'd been building. Friday, 6 p.m. transfer. Friday, 6:30, Grace's sighting. Friday, 7:20, private room. Extension, an entire chain of events hinged on the presence of someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I placed the license plate note beside the timeline, and the alignment became clearer. Grace, I asked softly, did you see him clearly? Yes, she said. And actually, I think he's the same man in that framed photo in their hallway. There it was, the confirmation. My instincts had been circling for days. The man from the picture, the one with his hand on Emma's back. The one, she said, didn't mean anything. Vincent Hale, a name tied to late-night calls, deliveries, insurance documents, and meetings she claimed were coincidences. Now he had access to their home. Grace looked at me with concern. I don't want to interfere, but Daniel, he hasn't looked well. I figured you should know. I nodded slowly. Thank you. You did the right thing. She left soon after, her steps soft on the hallway carpet. Once the door closed, the apartment felt different. Not heavier, just clearer. Like someone had finally wiped the fog from a mirror. I sat at the table and stared at the license plate note. Paper can be thin, fragile, forgettable, yet sometimes it carries the weight of a truth no one wants to say out loud. That was my of the chapter. A handwritten note with 7 digits that confirmed a stranger was not a stranger at all. I leaned back, letting the pieces settle at Emma. Hadn't been careless. She'd been confident. And confidence only grows when someone believes the truth is safely hidden. When they believe no one is looking for patterns. But the problem with hiding things is simple. The world keeps leaving traces. Receipts, phone notifications, strangers with keys, neighbors. With good memories, as the daylight dimmed, I placed the note into my folder. The folder was starting to feel heavier, not physically but in meaning. This wasn't about random coincidences anymore. There was movement behind the scenes, and I had glimpsed the first clear silhouette. The man in the photo wasn't a forgotten colleague. He was the visitor who walked into my son's home like it belonged to him, and that meant one thing. Someone was building a life in the shadows, a life that wasn't supposed to exist. Some answers don't come from conversations. They come from moments when the world stops, paying attention, and something private lies open long enough for truth to breathe. 3 days after, Grace handed me the license plate note. I went to see Daniel again. Not to interrogate him, just to check on him, the way fathers do when their sons begin carrying weights they refuse to name. He had sounded tired on the phone, his voice strained and thin. When I arrived at his apartment, the door was half open, the exact way it had been weeks earlier when Emma said, "He won't understand anyway." I stepped inside quietly. Daniel was in the kitchen, rinsing a mug. The sound of running water filled the room, soft but steady. "Dad," he said, surprised. "I thought you'd text first." "I was nearby," I told him. "Wanted to say hello," he nodded, rubbing his forehead. Yeah, of course. Come in." The living room looked the same as always, neat, curated, every object placed intentionally. But something felt off. A small shift in energy. The kind of shift you feel when someone is trying to keep their life from tipping over the edge. "I'm making tea," he said. "Give me a minute." He walked back to the kitchen, leaving his phone lying face down on the desk by the wall. I took a seat on the chair nearby, not meaning to look at anything. Just sitting. Just breathing. But when he placed the kettle on the stovetop, a vibration echoed through the desk. His phone lit up. Not the lock screen, the actual home screen, unlocked. She stepped inside, paused, and then headed to a table in the far corner. The seat where the lighting was lowest and the visibility from the street was nearly zero. She sat back straight, fingers tapping lightly on her phone. A few moments later, the door opened again. The man who walked in wore a gray jacket, and carried an expression of quiet confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from being allowed into places he shouldn't belong. Vincent. Hull 8, the man from the framed photo. The man from the delivery slip. The man from the phone calls. The man from Grace's sighting. He didn't hesitate. He walked directly to Emma's table, sat across from her, and leaned in. No greeting. No small talk. Just immediate, low conversation. From where I sat, I couldn't hear words, just murmurs. But body language is its own language, and there spoke volumes. Emma looked nervous, glancing toward the entrance twice in the first minute. Vincent didn't look nervous at all. His posture was steady, his jaw set, his eyes sharp. He slid a folder across the table. A thin, white folder stamped with a familiar blue emblem. The hospital. Logo. My chest tightened. I remembered the hallway at the clinic, the call from Vincent. Emma's lie about insurance paperwork was beginning to align. Emma opened the folder, flipping through pages with quick motions. At one point, she pushed it back slightly, shaking her head. Vincent responded with a subtle shrug, dismissive, almost amused. Then she pointed to a page, her finger pressing hard. He leaned in, adjusted the paper, and said something that made her exhale sharply. Almost like a sigh of surrender. I sat still, barely breathing. This wasn't a casual meeting. This wasn't workplace gossip. This wasn't harmless. Collaboration, this was planning. Quiet. Coordinated, concealed planning at one point. Emma reached into her purse and pulled out something small, a key. She placed it on the table, pushing it toward him slightly before retracting it, hesitant. He pressed 2 fingers lightly on it for a moment, then released it. A symbol, a negotiation, a silent agreement. I couldn't look away. After nearly 20 minutes, Vincent stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out without looking back. Emma watched him leave, then closed the folder quickly, tucking it under her arm like it was a secret she wished she hadn't touched. She paid the bill, left in a hurry, and disappeared into the street. I waited a full minute before moving. Not because I was afraid she'd see me, but because I needed to breathe. Sometimes reality arrives in a single moment, and you need time to let it settle before it changes you. When I finally stood and approached their table, I didn't touch anything. I didn't need to. The condensation ringed from her glass. The indentation where the folder sat, they were enough to burn the moment into memory. Before leaving, I stepped outside and took a single photo through the window. Emma and Vincent leaning across the table. Heads close, papers between them. Proof of something neither of them intended to be seen. That was the of this chapter A. Captured image that froze their hidden alliance in time. Walking back to my car, the wind picked up and the first drops of rain began to fall. I sat inside, hands resting on the steering wheel. Listening to the soft patter against the windshield, there were no more doubts, no more coincidences, no more pieces without. Meaning the truth wasn't approaching anymore, it was already here. Some truths are heavy enough to carry alone, but some require a witness, someone who can see the shape of danger. Even when you only have fragments. I didn't plan on involving anyone yet, especially not an attorney. It felt premature, dramatic, unnecessary. But after seeing Emma and Vincent together in that cafe, faces close, papers exchanging hands, a key sliding across the table, I realized I was standing at the edge of something, far larger than suspicion. I needed clarity, not emotional. Clarity. Legal clarity. That's why I called Clark. Attorney. Clark Bennett had been a quiet friend for years. Steady, observant, rational. The kind of man who didn't speak to fill silence. He spoke only when something mattered. When I asked if he had time to meet, he didn't ask questions. Come in, he said. Bring whatever you have. His office was small, warm, lined with dark wooden shelves and soft yellow lamps. A place where tension softened automatically, where conversations landed on deep carpet instead of hard floors. He motioned for me to sit. I placed my folder, the one holding Every, on the desk between us. "What's going on?" he asked gently. I opened the folder and laid out the pieces one by one: the restaurants, private room receipt, the diner slip, the clinic visit summary, the license plate note, the photo of the cafe meeting, the timeline, the transfer notification I'd memorized, the therapy appointment Daniel left behind. Clark didn't interrupt. He examined each document with the methodical patience of someone who understood that the smallest line on a page can unravel an entire truth. When he reached the photo, Emma and Vincent sitting across from each other with the hospital-stamped folder between them, he paused. His brow tightened almost imperceptibly. "Do you know him?" he asked. "His name is Vincent Hale." Clark exhaled. "I've heard that name before." My stomach tightened. "From where?" He didn't answer immediately. He lined the documents in a timeline the same way I had, then added the photo. Sliding it into place like the last piece of a puzzle. "Michael," he said quietly, "you're not imagining this." "I know," I replied, "but I don't know what I'm seeing." Tapped the photo. Hospital documents, private meetings, coordinated timing, financial movement, someone opening mail that isn't theirs, someone visiting your son's home with a key. "This isn't random, then what is it?" I asked. His voice was low, steady, precise. "A setup." The word hit harder than I expected. "Against who?" I asked. Clark didn't hesitate. "Daniel." I sat back, breath catching. I had suspected manipulation, secrecy, pressure, but a setup implied intent, strategy, a destination. "I don't know if it's financial," Clark continued, "or legal, or something involving medical paperwork. But whatever they're planning, they're close to finishing it." The room felt colder suddenly. "You're saying they're preparing something against him?" I asked quietly. "I'm saying," he replied, "that you need to protect him before something irreversible happens." He opened a drawer and pulled out a clean sheet of legal paper. "I'm drafting a preliminary affidavit," he said. "Not an accusation. A protective step. A timestamp proving you noticed these issues early in case someone tries to manipulate or misrepresent Daniel later." My chest tightened with equal parts fear and relief. Fear for Daniel, relief that someone finally saw what I saw. Clark handed me the document of this chapter. A simple draft, a single page, a quiet shield. "Keep documenting everything," he said. "Every message, every receipt, every inconsistency, especially anything regarding money or medical decisions." He leaned back, studying my face. "Do you think Daniel understands what's happening?" "No," I said honestly. "He's drowning, Clark, and he thinks it's his fault." Clark's jaw tightened slightly, anger, controlled and quiet. "Then it's even worse than I suspected." A silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, but dense with truth. Finally, he spoke again. "Michael, listen closely. Whatever Emma and this man are planning, they're almost ready to act. The timing on these documents, the secrecy, the coordination, this isn't the beginning. You're catching this at the end?" I nodded slowly. "What should I do?" "Stay close to your son," he said, "and prepare yourself. Because when their plan reaches its tipping point, it won't be subtle." His words echoed in the room long after I left. Outside the office, the sky had darkened into a deep slate gray. The wind carried the smell of rain. I walked to my car with the affidavit in my hand, the weight of it heavier than any piece of paper should be. I understood something new that day. Emma and Vincent weren't improvising. They weren't reacting. They were orchestrating, and someone orchestrating a plan doesn't stop until they either succeed or get caught. Money doesn't lie. People do. Circumstances do. Memories do, but transactions are honest in ways humans rarely are. And the moment I understood the transfer Emma tried to hide, everything else came into focus. After leaving Clark's office with the affidavit, the world looked different. Not louder, just clearer. Patterns I had been squinting at suddenly stood under sharper light. and one pattern kept drawing my attention back, like a quiet thread pulling everything toward itself. Friday. 6 p.m. transfer completed. The message on Emma's phone had been quick, but not quick enough. My mind had captured it the way a camera captures light instinctively. Still, I needed details. Facts, numbers, not assumptions. That meant talking to the bank. The next morning, I walked into the branch near my home. The lobby smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, and small potted plants filled the corners like silent observers. People waited in clean rows of chairs, holding deposit slips and envelopes. Everything felt orderly, almost too orderly compared to the chaos swirling around Daniel's life. A teller I'd known for years. Madison waved me forward. "What can I help you with, Mr. Reed?" I lowered my voice. "Just need to ask a general question. About your account." "No," I said. "About transfer timelines." Her posture shifted. Professional alert. She leaned in a little. "Okay, what kind of transfer?" "Large or unusual ones," I said. "Especially ones scheduled on Fridays." She typed something into her system. "Are you asking about a specific transaction?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm trying to understand how certain transfers avoid being flagged." She nodded slowly, understanding more than she said aloud. "Well, bank systems only flag transfers above certain thresholds. Transfers just under the review limit usually go through automatically." Subtle. Deliberate detail. She printed something from her system. A public information. Notice that explained the threshold amounts customers should know. Is this helpful? It was more than helpful. This was the chapter. A simple printout. Explaining that certain amounts just under the legal reporting limit slide through without triggering audits. "Madison," it iced gently. "Why would someone intentionally keep a transfer just under the threshold?" She blinked once, a calm, professional kind of hesitation, then replied, "To avoid oversight." 3 words, soft, neutral, precise, but they landed heavily as I walked out. I studied the notice, the threshold, the timing, the behavior. Emma's frantic reaction when the message appeared. She wasn't shocked the transfer went through. She was shocked I saw it, back home. I laid the notice beside my growing timeline. 6 p.m. transfer, 6:30 p.m. Grace sees Emma with Vincent. 7:20 p.m. Private room extension at the restaurant. That night. Daniel trembling at a diner booth. Money, meetings, pressure, emotion, all aligned within a 2-hour window. But something else bothered me. Daniel never mentioned any transfer. He wasn't someone who moved money casually. He barely moved money at all. He had always been cautious, painfully cautious, so who initiated it? Patterns don't lie. I went to Grace's apartment later that afternoon. She greeted me with her usual gentle smile, but her eyebrows knitted when she saw the folder in my hand. "I need to ask you something," I said softly. "About last Friday." She invited me inside, made tea we didn't drink, and waited. "You mentioned seeing Emma and that man around 6:30, I said. "Did she seem hurried?" Grace nodded. Very like she'd been interrupted or needed to be somewhere. "Oh, yes." "Did she carry anything?" "A small envelope," Grace said. "White?" She held it tight. "Envelope. Same kind insurance companies use, the same kind banks sometimes use for printed confirmations. The same kind I had seen on Daniel's coffee table weeks earlier." I asked one last question. "Did Daniel seem aware she met someone that night?" Grace's expression softened. "No. He looked lost that whole week. Like he was trying to keep up with something that kept moving without him, that aligned perfectly with everything I'd been gathering." Back home, I reread the bank notice. A single line caught my eye, a sentence written in dry. Formal language, transfers under the flagged. A threshold may still be. Traceable when linked to recurring or patterned. Activity, recurring patterned, exactly like every piece of this story. I stared. At the bold number, the threshold, and imagined a transfer just beneath it. Enough to matter. Enough to set things in motion. Enough to create leverage. Emma's. Leverage. Vincent's leverage. Daniel's. Drowning the truth wasn't just shaping itself anymore, it was clarifying. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't marital strain. This wasn't emotional distance. This was construction, a series of deliberate steps leading towards something. Planned, and the transfer wasn't the beginning. It was the midpoint. A quiet gear. Turning inside a machine I had only recently discovered. Some people reveal their intentions through anger. Others reveal them through silence. But the most dangerous ones, they reveal their intentions through sudden, suspicious kindness. By the time the next Friday arrived, my instincts were no longer whispering. They were steady, clear, methodical, the way the mind becomes when it finally accepts that something is wrong enough to require careful attention. I drove to Daniel and Emma's apartment that evening, carrying the calmest version of myself, not confrontational, not emotional, just present. Daniel had sounded worn down on the phone. His voice stretched thin. "I think you should come by," he said. And in those 8 words, I heard everything he didn't say. The moment Emma opened the door, she greeted me with a brightness that didn't match the rest of the week. "Michael," she said, overly warm, stepping forward with open arms. "Come in, please." Her smile sat too perfectly on her face like a mask. She practiced in the mirror. The apartment smelled of roasted herbs and freshly cleaned counters. Soft music played in the background, the kind people put on when they want to create a mood rather than enjoy it. The lighting was gentle, dimmed just enough to soften edges. Emma behaved like a host auditioning for an award. She took my coat before I could protest. She poured me a drink I didn't ask for. She complimented my shirt. Twice. As though the repetition would convince me it was genuine. Daniel stayed in the kitchen. He didn't come out to greet me immediately when he did. His eyes told the real story, shadows under them, jaw tense. "Motion's careful, Dad," he said quietly. I hugged him. He didn't hug back with strength. He hugged like someone keeping himself from collapsing. Emma clapped her hands lightly. "Dinner is almost ready." I wanted tonight to be special. A fresh start. Fresh start. The phrase echoed strangely as she bustled around the kitchen island, arranging plates and moving things unnecessarily. I noticed something on the counter, a stack of freshly printed menus. Elegant font, clean. Format, almost like something from a catered event. "Emma," I asked softly, "what are these?" She waved it off with a laugh. "Oh, just something silly I'd put together for our little dinner. Makes it feel more festive." Daniel's eyes flicked toward the menus, then away. As if afraid to acknowledge them, I picked one up, not out of suspicion, out of curiosity. It listed tonight's family dinner at the top. Below, it was a multi-course meal description. Far more elaborate than anything Emma typically cooked. At the bottom, printed neatly, was a signature line, approved by Daniel Reed, only. Daniel's real signature didn't look like that. Emma stood behind me, too close, watching for my reaction. "Nice, right?" she said. I set the menu down slowly. "Interesting choice." Her smile flickered for half a second, a glitch in the performance. Dinner was pleasant on the surface. Too pleasant. Emma talked endlessly, filling every silence before it could grow. Daniel barely spoke. He pushed food around his plate, hands shaking slightly. Twice during the meal, Emma placed a hand on Daniel's arm, squeezed, not affectionately, instructive lie, as if reminding him of something. After dessert, she disappeared into the bedroom to grab something fun, as she put it. Daniel and I were finally alone. He didn't waste a second. "She's planning something," he whispered, eyes darting toward the hallway. "She keeps saying we need to sign things, approve things. She wants me to agree to something tonight." "What kind of things?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Papers? Documents? I don't know." "And Vincent." I pressed gently. Daniel flinched at the name. "He was here earlier." "Before you came?" Cold ran through my chest like a thin blade of ice. "What did he want?" Daniel shook his head. Everything's a mess. I can't. He pressed his fingers to his eyes. I just can't. Before he could continue, Emma returned, smiling, radiant, carrying a small binder. A little something for us, she said sweetly. Just a few papers to review. Nothing complicated. Her voice was coated in honey. Her intentions smelled of smoke. She placed the binder on the table and slid it toward me as if offering a dessert menu. Michael, she said, since you're here, it would be wonderful if you encouraged Daniel. He's been so anxious about making decisions. Her tone was soft, coaxing, manipulative in the way a silk ribbon looks harmless. Until it tightens. I opened the binder. The first page listed financial authorizations. The second page referenced medical decision rights. The third page, half-filled, contained Daniel's supposed signature. The same signature I'd seen earlier, the same one that wasn't his. I closed the binder. Gently, Emma, I said quietly. I think Daniel needs time. Her smile vanished like a flame snuffed out between fingers. Well, she said. Colder now. That's disappointing. The atmosphere shifted. The warmth drained. The trap, almost sprung, tightened instead. That binder. That forged signature. That orchestrated evening. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't dinner. This was preparation. And she had almost succeeded. People think betrayal announces itself loudly with shouting, with slammed doors, with accusations hurled across rooms. But the truth? Sometimes betrayal arrives in a whisper you weren't meant to hear. For weeks. Emma's sentence had lived in the back of my mind like an echo trapped inside a hallway. He won't understand anyway. First, it felt like an insult, a casual dismissal she assumed I wouldn't hear. But the more the papers gathered in my folder, the more Daniel trembled at every question. And the more Vincent's presence seeped into their marriage, the less that sentence sounded like an insult. And the more it sounded like a code, a reassurance. Not for me, but for someone else in the room. With her, and on the evening after the binder incident, the echo finally found its source. I was sitting with the timeline spread before me, the menus, the binder, the call logs, the transfer notice, the private room receipt when Grace knocked again. She looked uneasy, holding a small envelope this time. Michael, she said softly, I didn't know if I should give you this, but I think you're looking for answers. Inside the envelope was a printed photo. Not taken by me, not taken by Daniel. Taken by her Grace through her apartment window. I didn't mean to capture this, she explained. I was photographing the sunset, and when I reviewed the pictures later, I saw Emma on the sidewalk. The photo was grainy, but clear enough. Emma on her phone, pacing, one hand pressed to her forehead. Behind her, leaning against a black car with the same license plate Grace had memorized, stood Vincent, and between them, suspended in the middle of the captured moment, was the unmistakable expression of a secret mid-discussion. Grace pointed to the picture timidly. Look closer, she said, in the photo. You could see Emma's lips slightly parted mid-sentence, but the caption wasn't the important part. It was the shape of her mouth, her expression, and the position of her hand. She wasn't dismissing someone. She was reassuring someone. I think this was the moment, Grace said quietly. The afternoon you visited them. The day she said that thing behind the door, cold shiver ran through me, because the angle of her body, the tension in her posture, it all matched the memory I'd replayed countless times. I examined the photo more closely, almost holding my breath. She wasn't talking to Daniel. She wasn't talking about me at all. She was talking to Vincent. Don't worry, she had said that day. He won't understand anyway. Reassurance. Comfort. A promise that whatever plan they were building, whatever pressure they were applying to Daniel, I would stay out of it because they assumed I'd remain oblivious. The sentence wasn't. It's designed to belittle. It was designed to coordinate. That truth landed with a quiet, devastating clarity. I sat back, the folder open in front of me, and realized the painful simplicity of it. Emma wasn't underestimating my intelligence, she was overestimating her secrecy. The photo that was mine for this chapter. A time-stamped piece of evidence that reframed everything I had heard and seen, Grace placed a hand on my arm. I don't know what they're doing, but Daniel, he doesn't look free in his own home anymore. I nodded, too slowly. Pieces of the puzzle pulled themselves into alignment. The forged signature, the financial pressure, the medical documents, the orchestrated dinners, the late-night calls, and the whispered assurance behind the door. Everything centered around one intention: control Daniel, neutralize me, secure their plan. And the sentence wasn't an insult. It was a strategy. After Grace left, I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, letting the truth settle the way dust settles on a forgotten shelf. Calm, quiet, inevitable. I replayed the moment behind the door once more, this time with new understanding. Emma wasn't annoyed with me. She was reassuring Vincent that I wouldn't interfere. She had no idea I was standing there, hearing every syllable. She miscalculated. The trap she believed she had, carefully built around Daniel, was now visible from the outside, and the belief that I wouldn't understand had become the very crack her entire plan began leaking from. The next step was no longer about suspicion. It was about evidence, the kind that couldn't be explained away with charm or apology. I placed Grace's photo into the folder, smoothing the edges. One more truth preserved, one more thread tied. And as I closed the folder, a quiet thought rose inside me. Understanding wasn't the problem. Silence was. Some truths arrived gradually through whispers, receipts, and late-night confessions. But some truths arrive all at once, in the form of a single document placed quietly inside a folder. The morning after Grace brought me the photo, I woke with a heaviness in my chest. Not panic, something steadier, something like resolve. The pieces were no longer scattered. They pointed somewhere. And now I needed the paperwork that sat at the center of all their movements. The hospital folder. The same one I had seen on the cafe table between Emma and Vincent. The same one Emma had once tried to hide under her arm. The same one with a medical logo stamped in blue. I didn't know what it contained, but I knew where to ask. The hospital lobby was quiet when I arrived. A few patients waited along the wall, scrolling through their phones. Nurses moved through the halls with practiced efficiency. The air was clean, sterile, humming softly with ventilation. I approached the information desk, where a young receptionist greeted me with a patient smile. "How can I help you today?" "I'm here regarding a recent administrative inquiry involving my son," I said. My voice was calm, not accusatory, just factual. "Name?" she asked. "Daniel Reed." She typed into her system, eyes scanning the screen. "There was a file inquiry earlier this month," she said, "made by someone listed as Emma Carter Reed." She clicked the entry again. 2 forms were printed and picked up. My stomach tightened. "What forms?" "Can't show you." "The originals," she said gently. "But I can provide copies if you're listed as an emergency contact." I slid my ID across the desk. Daniel had listed me years ago, long before Emma was in his life. The receptionist clicked through the system again and nodded. "I'll print them." A few minutes later, she handed me 2 papers clipped together. Of this chapter. "Is there anything else I can help with?" she asked. "No," I said, though my voice felt smaller than a moment before. This is enough." I walked to a waiting area chair, sat down, and unfolded the documents with steady hands. The first page was a medical authorization renewal form, a standard document that allowed someone to act for Daniel in medical decisions if he was incapacitated. The section labeled Primary Authorized Representative listed name, Emma Carter Reed, spouse expected. Not surprising, but the second page made my breath catch. It was a financial responsibility reassignment form, a form that designated who would be responsible for unpaid bills, treatments, or administrative charges if Daniel ever required certain medical procedures or long-term care. But the signature line was not Daniel's handwriting. I'd known Daniel's signature since he first learned to write it. The loops, the angle, the natural pressure of the pen. This one was stiff, unnatural. The same forged signature I had seen on the dinner menu binder. The reassigned beneficiary? Primary responsible party? Vincent Hale. The room seemed to go quieter. The air felt colder. I read it twice, then a third time. In disbelief, Vincent, the man who had slipped in and out of their home. Vincent, the man at the cafe with the folder? Vincent, the man Emma had been reassuring on the phone. Vincent, this man whose presence had manipulated every corner of Daniel's life. They weren't just controlling Daniel emotionally. They were trying to reassign his financial burden, his obligations, perhaps even his rights. Why? What did they gain? And the other signature caught my eye. Secondary responsible party, Emma Carter Reed. A safety net, a backup. My mind replayed the last 2 weeks, the transfer under the threshold, the private room bill, the meetings, the pressure, the binder she tried to push during dinner. This wasn't about an affair. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't emotional manipulation. For its own sake, it was leverage. A coordinated effort to move pieces around Daniel without his knowledge financially, medically, legally, and now the paper in my hand turned suspicion into evidence. This was the plan. This was the destination. They had forged his signature, reassigned financial responsibility to another man, and done it under the radar, counting on the fact that I wouldn't understand. They didn't expect me to find the forms. They didn't expect the system to hand me proof. My hands steadied, not with anger, but with clarity. Cold, undeniable clarity. If they were willing to forge medical documents, if they were willing to shift responsibility to Vincent, if they were willing to pressure Daniel into agreeing blindly, then whatever they were planning, it wasn't just unethical. It was dangerous. I folded the documents carefully and placed them into my folder. 2 thin sheets of paper, but heavy enough to tilt the entire balance of what was coming. As I walked out of the hospital, the truth felt sharper than ever. This wasn't manipulation anymore. It was strategy wrapped in deceit, and Daniel wasn't just overwhelmed, he was being cornered. People think silence is neutral, that it keeps peace, avoids conflict, prevents things from getting worse. But silence can be a shield used against you, especially when someone else is writing the script of your life while you're trying not to make noise. When I left the hospital with those forged documents folded inside my folder, I knew the quiet phase of this situation was over. Not because I wanted confrontation. I didn't, but because the truth had grown too big to stay hidden inside paper. Daniel needed to see what was happening around him, not the fragments he felt, not the emotional weight he couldn't name, but the documented, procedural truth of how he was being controlled. I drove to his apartment feeling an ache in my chest. Not fear, but a kind of grief for the version of him that still believed this was all his fault. I rang the bell. He opened the door slowly, like someone expecting bad news. "Dad?" he asked. "I need to talk to you," I said quietly. "And you need to listen." He hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. The apartment looked dimmer than usual, blinds half drawn, a half-finished cup of coffee on the table, untouched food on the counter. "Is she home?" I asked. "No," he said. "She stepped out." Didn't say where. Of course she did. We sat at the dining table. He rubbed his wrists again, the nervous gesture he'd carried since childhood. His eyes were exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying someone else's chaos on your back. "Daniel," I began softly, "I need you to see something. And I need you to understand that nothing I'm showing you is your fault." He looked up. Something fragile flickering in his expression. I opened the folder. The room felt smaller immediately. First, I placed the hospital medical authorization renewal form in front of him. He frowned. "What's this?" "Something you didn't sign," I said. He picked it up slowly, eyes scanning the handwriting. Then he froze. "Dad, this isn't my signature." "I know." He swallowed hard. "Why would she look at the second document?" I said gently. He hesitated before. Picking it up, the financial responsibility, reassignment form, with Vincent's name listed as the primary, responsible party, and Emma's as the secondary. And his forged signature beneath it all. His breathing changed. A sharp inhale, then a trembling exhale. She signed this?" He whispered. "No," I said. "She forged it. Or had someone forge it. Either way, it wasn't you." His fingers trembled on the page. "But why, Vincent? Why would she put 'em? Because they're working together, I said calmly. Financially, legally, quietly. He stared at the form as if it were written in fire. Then his face crumpled, not with tears, but with realization, the kind that rearranges your entire understanding of your life. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, head in his hands. I thought I was losing my mind, he whispered. I thought the stress was me. I thought the pressure was me. I thought I disappointed her somehow. No, I said firmly. You were being maneuvered. He didn't speak. His breathing was uneven, shoulders shaking slightly. Not crying, but something close. A kind of grief mixed with anger, mixed with relief. I placed a hand on his back. We're not done yet, I said softly. There's more you need to know. He lifted his head. Eyes rimmed with red. I pulled out the sticky note, the one he'd written without realizing its meaning. Call Vincent back, 3 p.m. Don't tell her. I didn't understand this when I saw it, I said. But now it makes sense. You weren't collaborating with him. You were scared of him. Daniel nodded slowly. Painfully, he told me I needed to help them fix things. That I needed to follow instructions so we wouldn't lose everything. I thought he was helping Emma handle something serious. I didn't know. You didn't know? Because they made sure you didn't know, I said quietly. He covered his face with both hands. That night I came to your house, he said shakily. I wanted to tell you everything. But I was so confused. I didn't know who to trust. You can trust me, I said, and you're not alone in this. He lowered his hands and stared at the papers again. It's all here, he whispered. In documents. In signatures. In dates. Yes, I said. This is what happens when silence protects the wrong people for too long. Daniel nodded, voice low, but certain. I can't stay quiet anymore. And in that moment, that quiet, trembling moment, something inside him shifted. He wasn't drowning now. He was surfacing. He wasn't confused. He was angry. He wasn't. Alone, he was ready. I closed the folder gently. We're going to end this, I said. Together. And he believed me. Courtrooms have a strange kind of silence. Not empty. Not peaceful, but full. Like the room itself is holding its breath. Waiting to see which version of the truth will survive the day. Daniel and I didn't speak much on the drive to Clark's office. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the things we needed to say were too heavy, too raw, too newly understood. He kept the folder on his lap the entire time. Fingers pressed against it as if it were a lifeline in a way. It was, when we walked into Clark's office, he stood immediately. He saw Daniel's face, the exhaustion, the humiliation, the dawning anger, and his expression shifted from professional caution to personal concern. Sit, he said gently. Both of you sat across from him, and Daniel placed the folder on the desk with slow, deliberate hands. Clark opened it, not casually, not hurriedly, but with the methodical steady, calm of someone preparing to defuse something dangerous. You saw them? Clark asked Daniel, tapping the forged papers lightly. Daniel nodded. Yes. And you didn't sign any of this? No, Daniel said, voice firm despite the tremor underneath. None of it. Clark exhaled through his nose. Then this is worse than I thought. This isn't manipulation anymore, it's fraud. The word hung in the room like cold air, fraud, a clean, procedural term, a devastating, life-faltering truth. Clark organized the papers in a careful sequence. The medical authorization form, the financial responsibility, reassignment, the forged binder menu signature, the bank threshold. Notice the timeline, the photo from the cafe. Piece by piece. A blueprint of deception lay on his desk. Then Clark leaned forward, voice steady but edged. I'm filing for immediate legal protection. We're requesting a freeze on any financial decisions made in Daniel's name. We're submitting these documents for forensic verification. Daniel swallowed. Will she know? Oh, yes, Clark said. She'll know almost immediately. Daniel's hands tightened into fists. Good, he whispered. And just like that, silence stopped being protection. It became fuel. Within 2 hours, Clark had drafted the necessary filings and printed copies for us. The pages were crisp, heavy, official, the kind of paper that forces the truth into daylight whether people like it or not. That afternoon, we went to the courthouse. The lobby echoed with footsteps and murmured conversations. Clerks moved briskly behind glass windows, stamping documents and answering questions with rehearsed efficiency. But when we stepped into the courtroom for the emergency hearing, the air felt different, cold, still, loaded. A judge sat at the bench, glasses low on her nose, scanning Clark's initial filing. Her brow tightened, not dramatically, but noticeably when she reached the forged signature. "Mr. Reed," she said. "Addressing Daniel, you did not sign this document?" "No, Your Honor." "And the signature under your name. Do you recognize it?" Daniel looked at the page through shaking breaths. "It looks like someone tried to copy my handwriting, but it's not mine." The judge turned to Clark. "We will need a forensic review." Clark nodded. "The request has already been submitted." The judge flipped to the financial reassignment form, the one naming Vincent Hale as the primary responsible party. Her lips tightened. "And this individual, who is he exactly?" Daniel hesitated. Clark answered for him. "Someone with unauthorized involvement in his marriage, finances, and personal affairs." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Do we have confirmation of his participation?" Clark lifted the cafe photo. "Yes, Your Honor, along with timestamps, receipts, neighbor testimony, and documented interactions." The judge took her time reviewing the image, quiet, unhurried, absorbing everything. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of a decision already forming. "I am placing an immediate temporary freeze on all medical, financial, and legal authorizations made in Mr. Reed's name within the last 60 days. Additionally, I am ordering both parties named in the reassignment form to appear for questioning." The room was silent. Daniel exhaled shakily, but it wasn't fear, it was relief, the kind a drowning man feels when his feet finally reach solid ground. As we stepped out of the courtroom, the fluorescent hallway lights felt brighter than they had going in. Not warm, but honest. Daniel leaned against the wall, covering his face for a moment. "You did this," he whispered. "No," I said softly. "We did this, and the papers did the rest." He nodded, wiping his eyes. But the truth was clear now. Emma and Vincent weren't just losing control. They were being pulled into the light, and the light doesn't lie. Some evidence arrives like a hammer, some arrives like a whisper, and some arrives in the quietest way possible. Tucked inside a forgotten grocery bag, waiting for the right moment to be seen after the emergency hearing. The air around Daniel seemed lighter for the first time in months. Not free, not yet, but loosened, like a tight knot that finally gives way. Still, Clark warned us, be prepared. They'll fight this. So over the next few days, Daniel stayed with me. We talked. Little, we rested much. We let the shock of everything settle in a way that didn't shatter us, but the quiet never lasts long in a situation built on deception. 3 days after court, Grace knocked again. Her knock was urgent this time, not soft, not hesitant. "Michael," she said, breathing slightly fast, "I found something. I think you should see it." In her hand was a crumpled grocery bag, the reusable kind Emma always carried. "I saw her throw this out hurriedly last week," Grace explained. "It fell out of the bin this morning when they were collecting trash. I didn't know what to expect. Receipts, wrappers, maybe nothing at all. But inside the bag, mixed in with a few crinkled napkins and an empty bottle, was a single folded restaurant receipt, one we had never seen before. And the moment I unfolded it, my breath caught because I recognized the restaurant name. Immediately, the same place where I'd seen Emma and Vincent meet weeks earlier. The same place. She insisted she'd never been to without. Daniel. The timestamp read, "Last Friday, 7:56 p.m., not." The Friday of the private room extension. Not. The Friday of the transfer. Different Friday, one even closer to the court. Filings, and under the list of ordered items to entrees, to drinks. One dessert was a handwritten note from the server. Same table as last time. Same table last time. 2 words that turned this small slip of paper into a knife, cutting through their entire story. This wasn't a one-time meeting. It wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't accidental. It was routine. A pattern. A repeated collaboration. I looked up at Grace. "Where exactly did you find this?" "In the recycle bin," she said. But it had fallen into the side compartment. She must have dropped it without noticing. Of course she didn't notice. Arrogance blinds people more than fear ever does. Daniel walked into the kitchen at that moment, curious about the commotion. When he saw the receipt in my hand, his face tightened, not in confusion, but in recognition. "That place," he whispered. "She told me she hated their food. She said she'd never go back." Took the paper from me and read it again. Slowly, painfully, she went there with him. His voice cracked. "More than once?" I nodded gently. "Yes." Daniel stepped back, shoulders curling inward. Not in weakness, but in the realization of how long this deception had been building behind him. He moved to the window, staring out into nothing, gripping the windowsill so tightly his knuckles turned white. "They planned everything together," he said quietly. "Every detail, every push, every lie." His reflection in the glass looked like someone witnessing the aftermath of a storm he didn't know he'd been standing in. "Daniel," he said softly, "this isn't about you being blind. This is about them being calculated." He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. Then he turned back. "What do we do with this?" "We give it to Clark," I said. "This is proof of ongoing coordination and deliberate secrecy." He nodded slowly, purposefully. When we arrived at Clark's office an hour later, he examined the receipt with a level of focus I had seen only a few times in my life, the kind of focus legal professionals use when they know a case is about to shift. "This," Clark said, tapping the handwritten note at the bottom, "is extremely important because of the timestamp?" Daniel asked. "Because of the phrase, 'same table as last time,'" Clark replied. "It establishes a pattern of repeated meetings. Not a single choice. Not a moment of weakness. A deliberate partnership." He attached the receipt to the growing evidence file, sliding it in beneath the forged signature documents. "This strengthens everything," he said. "The judge will see this for what it is, sustained collusion." Daniel let out a breath that trembled like a loose wire. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is the last piece we needed," I told him. "The truth is no longer scattered. It's complete." He nodded again, but this time his posture straightened, his hands steadied, and for the first time, he looked like someone stepping out of a shadow he'd lived in for too long. Some endings don't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Some arrive quietly with a single sentence spoken by someone who finally realizes their mask has fallen. Court hearings move slowly, until they suddenly don't. The morning of the final review felt strangely calm. Daniel and I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom. The folder of evidence between us like a solid wall we had built brick by brick. He wasn't shaking anymore. He wasn't shrinking. He sat upright, hands folded, breathing steady, a man who had finally stepped into the truth, rather than around it. Emma arrived 10 minutes before the session, sharp. Blazer, perfect hair, phone in hand. Composure carved carefully into every movement. But her eyes. Her eyes told the real story. Nervous, calculating, searching for an escape that didn't exist anymore. Vincent wasn't with her. He hadn't shown up at any hearing. Not once. Cowardice often hides behind coordination. When the bailiff opened the courtroom doors, everyone stood. The judge took her seat, files before her, glasses low on her nose. She spoke with the same calm professionalism she had shown at the emergency hearing. But there was a sharper edge today. The kind of edge that appears when evidence stops being scattered and becomes undeniable. "Ms. Carter Reed," the judge began slowly, "we're here today to review the allegations of forged documentation, concealed meetings, unauthorized medical filings, and financial manipulation. Emma shifted. Her confidence wavered, not dramatically, but in small cracks, a stiffened jaw, a tightened grip on her purse, a breath drawn to shallow. Clark presented everything: the medical forms, the forged signatures, the transfer timeline, the photo Grace had taken, the restaurant receipts, including the final one, same table as last. Time. Each paper whispered a truth she couldn't bury anymore. When the judge examined the financial reassignment form, naming Vincent Hale as the primary responsible party, she paused for a long, heavy moment. "Miss Carter-Reed," the judge said quietly, "would you like to explain why your husband's medical and financial authority was reassigned to a man outside this marriage?" Emma opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Words didn't come. Only a thin exhale, disguised as composure. Daniel didn't look at her. Not once. Clark leaned forward. "Your Honor, we ask that Mr. Reed be immediately granted full protective relief pending further investigation, and that all documents submitted under forged authority be invalidated." Out. The judge nodded. "Given the evidence, the court agrees." A soft gasp escaped Emma, barely audible, but real. The judge continued, his voice firm. "All authorizations are hereby revoked. Any future filings involving Mr. Reed must be accompanied by verified proof of consent. Ms. Carter-Reed, you will be required to submit to further questioning under oath regarding your coordination with Mr. Hale." Right. Emma swallowed. "Your Honor," the judge raised a hand. "Save it for the formal deposition." When the session ended, the courtroom air shifted from tension to something else. Not relief. Not victory. Something more grounded. Truth that finally had space to stand upright. People began filing out. Clark gathered the papers. Daniel remained seated for a moment, breathing slowly, absorbing the reality that had just unfolded in front of him. And Emma. When the judge left, and the bailiff opened the side door, Emma didn't walk out immediately. She stood still. Her composure cracked. Her jaw trembled just once. The only sign of emotion she let slip. Then she turned toward me. "Not Daniel. Not—" Clark mirrored. Her voice was low. Nearly a whisper, but loaded with bitterness and disbelief. "You should have stayed out of it." Not shouted, not screamed, just stated. Like a verdict she wished she could rewrite. I held her gaze calm, unmoved. Double quotes, Emma. I replied quietly, "You shouldn't have underestimated him."
Ow.
Her expression shifted. Not fear, but realization. The realization that the man she spent months trying to sideline was the one who had pulled Daniel back from the edge. She walked away then, heels tapping sharply against the tile floor, each step faster than the last. Not power, retreat. Vincent still didn't appear. People like him rarely show up. When accountability calls their name, Daniel stood and exhaled a long, shaking breath, but this breath was different from all the others. It was freedom unspooling inside him. "What now?" he asked. "Now," I said softly, "we rebuild, without lies pressing down on you." He nodded slowly, and in that nod, I saw something returning to him, the version of himself he thought he'd lost, as we stepped out into the hallway. Sunlight pooled through the tall windows. Not dramatic sunlight, not cinematic, just steady, honest light. The kind that doesn't hide anything. Some storms end loudly, others end with the quietest sound in the world, the sound of someone breathing normally again. Life didn't fix itself overnight after the courtroom decision. There were no grand celebrations, no dramatic announcements, no cinematic music swelling in the background, just small shifts, the kind you only notice when you've lived too long in fear. Daniel moved into my guest room for a while, not because he needed to hide, but because he needed space. Space from pressure, space from manipulation, space from the version of himself that Emma and Vincent had tried to sculpt into something obedient. The first few mornings were quiet. He'd sit at the table with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing, letting the silence feel safe again. He didn't talk much at first, and I didn't push him. Healing isn't loud. It's slow. We kept in touch with Clark almost daily. He guided us through every procedural step, freezing accounts, invalidating signatures, documenting everything for the follow-up. Casey didn't dramatize anything. He didn't reassure us with big speeches. He simply told the truth, calm. Procedural truth, the kind we had learned to cling to. A week after the hearing, Daniel finally said something I knew had been sitting inside him for months. "I thought I deserved it," he whispered. I set my coffee down slowly. Deserved what? The pressure, the blame, the confusion. He shook his head. "She always made me feel like everything was my fault, like I wasn't smart enough, or strong enough, or stable enough." I looked at him gently. "Daniel, people who manipulate others depend on that belief. They survive on it," he nodded, staring down at his hands, the same hands that had shaken in fear weeks ago, now steadier, sturdier. "I don't feel like that anymore," he said softly. That sentence alone was worth every sleepless night. Later that afternoon, Grace stopped by with a container of soup, her quiet way of helping. She spoke to Daniel near the doorway, her tone careful but warm. "You look different," she told him. "Better." He asked hesitantly. "Freer," she said. He smiled. A real smile this time, not forced, not performative. Just real. Emma didn't reach out, not directly, but she sent one message to Daniel along. Elaborate text filled with excuses, reinterpretations, and soft rewrites of history. She blamed stress, external pressure, misunderstandings, miscommunication. Not once did she mention responsibility. Not once did she admit the forged signatures. Not once did she acknowledge Vincent's role. Daniel read the message in silence, then handed me the phone.